I'm Maureen Burness, and the reason that I'm here is that I had the opportunity to be the co-executive director of the statewide special education task force on special education. And one of our primary recommendations, probably the primary recommendation, was that we work toward ensuring that we are one system, one coherent system of education, not special education separated from general education. And so we had one of our subcommittees, for example, was accountability and assessment. And so what happened in the meantime was our state board did an incredible job of addressing everything through ESSA and our recommendations to say, what are we going to do about being accountable for all children? And what they came out with last year and are just about to come out with a new version is the dashboard. So all of these things have happened at the same time. And when that happened and this last release came out, one of the things that we very quickly noticed was that special education was identified as the reason for the most numbers of districts that were required to be in differentiated assistance, which might be why you're here. And there's a new rollout coming, and so we're anticipating even more districts being identified as needing differentiated assistance. And so I'm very happy as a longtime ACSA advocate to say that what happened from that is that Wes Smith, our executive director, said, what are we going to do to support our member districts? And Margaret, who is in charge of, in fact, Wes just said, Margaret, take care of that, right? And so she has set up a couple of different meetings, and we've tried to work on how could ACSA be a support to you all in the field. And so we have a plan that starts with today, and that would be that we would give you the information from the statewide perspective about differentiated assistance, and then the idea is that we would follow up with regional meetings to see what do our districts need in order to address this issue. So we are incredibly lucky to have a great panel here. I was very impressed even just listening to them as we were beginning, or not even beginning, they're at work talking about how else are we going to do this? What are our next steps? It's a super job. And so I want to give you some introductions to each of them. What we tried to do was bring you the sequence of perspective. What we wanted was the Department of Education's goals in differentiated assistance, and then with our relatively new, how long is California Collaborative? 3 years now? 3 years now. California Collaborative for Educational Excellence has a role in supporting districts in differentiated assistance, as do county offices of education, and because of the special education requirements, now so do SELPAs, and those have been acknowledged in our state budget. And so what we tried to do then was bring you that range of perspective. Jason here actually works with WestEd rather than the Department of Education. There's a state board meeting going on right now, and so when we talked about having that representation about what has the board done, Jason had the opportunity to be one of the people who worked with and supported the board in their plans for dashboard. He'll be able to tell you a lot more about that. So I'd like to introduce each of them. I literally tried to make these a little bit shorter, but it's so impressive, and I do want you to know how lucky we are to have all these people here. So I'm going to start with Jason. He is the Director of Strategy and Performance, Comprehensive School Assistance Program at WestEd. He oversees and guides, this is called CSAP's, performance and accountability practice that includes supporting state, regional, and local education agencies to align their policies, strategies, and accountability practices to achieve more equitable education outcomes for students. His practice provides this support through capacity building, facilitation of professional learning networks, policy implementation strategies, and analysis of financial data, including the effective use of resources. Currently, California's primary focus is to support implementation of the local control funding formula law. Previously, Willis was the Assistant Superintendent of Community Engagement and Accountability for the San Jose Unified School District, was the Chief Financial Officer at Stockton Unified School District, and was Budget Director at Oakland Unified School District. Willis has advised multiple states, national education organizations, and commissions on the formation of funding and accountability systems. He currently sits on the technical working group advising the first national study on the impact of weighted student funding systems. He received his master's degree in education policy and finance from Teachers College Columbia University and a bachelor's degree from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., and is a graduate of the Broad Residency in Urban Education. So thank you very much for being here. Next, Dr. Karla Estrada serves as the Director of the Strategic Partnerships and Personalized Learning for the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. Estrada has spent over 20 years as an educational leader committed to successfully addressing educational opportunities for all students. Before her time with CCEE, Estrada served as the Deputy Superintendent for the offices in the Academic and Student Support for Equity team, ASSET, with the Boston Public Schools. Estrada has led efforts and collaborated with others to transform systems driven on compliance to those engaged in attaining successful instructional outcomes for all students. Critical to this success has been the partnerships with schools, local and central offices. She was a proud teacher and administrator in Los Angeles Unified School District. Estrada obtained her doctorate in educational leadership for social justice from Loyola Marymount University by examining the relationship between English language development and the over 22,000 English learners with specific learning disabilities in an urban school district. She is a board-certified behavior analyst and holds multiple credentials in instruction and administration. So now we've gone from the state to CCEE and then to the county offices because they were written into this accountability plan, and who we have to help us with that is Dr. Ed MANANSALA. He has spent more than 20 years working in the public school system, beginning as the coordinator of learning support services with the Sacramento City Unified School District, transitioning into the principal and superintendent of St. Hope Public Schools. Under his leadership at Sacramento High, the school demonstrated significant academic growth and a four-year college acceptance rate that increased from 25% to 75%. In January 2016, he was appointed as the County Superintendent of Schools in Dorado County. So while he is a county superintendent, he's here actually representing the whole big picture of SELPA, the California County Superintendent's Educational Services Association, and he is the incoming president of SELPA. Dr. MANANSALA has a vision of creating conditions for all children to meet their intellectual and academic potential and advocates for a wide range of students from the most vulnerable to those who are high performing. And then, not at all last or least, we have Heather DiFede. She is serving in her 7th year as the Executive Director for East County SELPA, located in the San Diego area. During her 25 years in education, she has also served as a District Special Education Director, Coordinator, Program Specialist, and Special Education Teacher. She received her formal education in Florida, including her master's degree in Curriculum and Instruction and Educational Technology. In 2016, she was honored as the ACSA Special Education Administrator of the Year at the state level. She has served ACSA's Region 18 as the representative to the Student Services Special Education Council and currently serves as the Secretary for the East County School Leaders ACSA Charter. Heather also currently serves as the chair of the SELPA Administrators Association. She is a member of the CCEE Students with Disabilities Collective, the Statewide System of Support Work Group, and has served on the Dashboard Alternate Status Schools Work Group. So again, thank you all very much for being here. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Arturo Flores, who works for ACSA as a lead consultant and is a prior superintendent, and he's been my background and support for getting this panel together to talk to you today. So what we did is prepare a copy of the questions that we gave to our panelists beforehand, which I hope you all have. What we want is a conversation that does take you through the state, through the collaborative, through the county offices and the SELPAs. And so if we could start, Jason, with you, if you could introduce yourself and please tell us your role in the organization you represent and how you see your organization's work in coordinating and providing differentiated assistance support for districts relative to their special education data points. I'm going to put that right in front of you. Thank you.
Sure. Well, good morning. It's wonderful to see you all here. I feel like of all the panels that I've ever sat on, I have the best view. But yeah, thank you to ACSA, and it's really kind of humbling to be able to sit on such a incredible panel with some really smart, dedicated folks doing this work in the state of California. As Maureen had mentioned, I'm with WestEd. We play a fairly significant role in helping to facilitate the design and current development of the system support, kind of writ large. My kind of role here today, as Maureen kind of alluded to, is I'm here in part representing the Department of Education. Kristen Wright, who's the current division director for special education, had a little other event with the state board meeting going on today. So I decided that I would try to kind of pull on my britches and kind of step in for her as best I can. Certainly not as beautiful nor articulate, but I will do my best today. So when we think about the kind of state role, kind of your question, Maureen, about kind of what role the state, specifically the Department of Education, and by extension the State Board of Education, plays within kind of differentiated assistance, which most folks hopefully in the room know that that is one of 3 levels that are articulated in the system of support. It is a more progressive level of support that's offered to school districts as they're identified through various student groups or state indicators on the dashboard, is that in large part the Department of Education, and this is kind of ever evolving, and folks on the panel will talk about this today, is really rethinking the way that the state is orienting itself towards the support for districts. In particular, not thinking so much about kind of pushing this notion of compliance or monitoring as being the primary piece of work that we're doing with school districts, but really kind of flipping that paradigm to think first about the circumstances and situations of districts related to the signals that we're getting in terms of where they're not doing as well with student performance, and figuring out ways in which to support them along that path. I think uniquely in the area of special education in particular, we have in this country some very well-defined laws and case law that articulate a kind of bare minimum to the work that school districts need to be doing on behalf of students with disabilities, and the Department of Education plays that role. Largely, the division that Kristen sits in is funded from federal funds. $1.3 billion flow through that agency on its way to school districts to help support a portion of the support to students with disabilities in those school districts. And that is a role and function. And there are certainly things that that department does that are really critical to think and offer signals to school districts about how to think about those populations. You know, one that comes immediately to mind is thinking about disproportionality issues that are coming up within special education populations, which is a very important way in which to understand access to educational opportunities that certain students are getting within those school environments. I would also say, in addition to that type of work, Kristen and other staff at the Department of Ed have been leading an effort to really rethink and evolve their role. That again, they're not just a matter of kind of providing those data or flagging those issues, but really creating opportunities in which the school districts are able to think about ways to unpack those data. And I know that some of my other colleagues will talk about this in more detail, but thinking about the kind of systems and structures and how you are able to work with school districts to not just say, hey, this is a problem, go fix it, but to say that, hey, this is a challenge that's happening in your district, and what are the various sets of supports that either the County Office of Education can offer, the state, various state agencies, or even other third-party providers to make sure that they are setting themselves on a path to that kinds of improvement. And in large part, the Department of Ed, amongst any other agency or organization in the state of California, has access to tremendous troves of data that I think, if mined appropriately, the right kind of questions are asked, the data is used appropriately, can be a really powerful asset as we are trying to unpack a very complex and complicated system around how we're offering support to students with disabilities. So I'll kind of end there on that first question, I think, moving on.
Great. So Karla, can you talk about CCEE and its role?
Happy to. Good morning, everybody. So for the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, one of the key elements of what we are focused on is thinking about how can we be as agile as necessary as a state agency to be responsive to different needs that may occur through the support that we need to offer, not only through local agencies, but also in partnership with our county offices, our SELPAs, and the California Department of Ed. We also see our role as capacity builders, and we see it this way in two different ways. One, at the state level. So at the state level, we are collaborating with folks like the CDE. We're collaborating with our county offices and our SELPAs to look at, one, do we see that our students with disabilities in particular may need different types of supports? And so what do we need to look at from the state perspective to ensure that we can adjust and make the needs address those needs and make those resources available to our school districts, to our county offices, and so on. So that's one. That has actually created an opportunity through our special education SELPA resource leads directors that we right now are identifying them. I'm sure many of you may have been familiar with the RFA that recently came out for SELPA leads. That is actually going to add to what Jason was describing as our systems of support, because we know that we need to make sure that those are the most closest to our students with disabilities are informed and providing and making decisions about what we need to make available to our districts. So that's another place that we've been involved. And then additional way that the California Collaborative has been contributing to this work has been also with our Students with Disabilities Collective. The collective's main purpose is really to bring state agencies that are special education influencers, is what we call them, but special education influencers at the state level who are making decisions or are bringing greater coherence around what kind of supports become available to our school districts. How do we make sure that we're being coherent in our communication, in our resources, in our tools, but also how are we making sure that if there are particular needs that need to be addressed, that we surface those collectively and then determine how do we make sure they become things that we can address, but also make sure that become available to everyone. And so as the California Collaborative continues its work, one of the things that we're also thinking about when it comes to our students with disabilities and the differentiated assistance is how can we also support at the local level? And so this has been something that's become much more recent with AB 1840. There's been a desire to say, what are we going to do around academic support for districts that may be in some type of typically fiscal distress? How can we also be sure that we provide that academic support? And that's a role that CCE's been involved in collaboration with the county offices and the SELPAs, but we're now moving into more of a local response, that agility portion of our work. How can we be that type of response that is directly at that local level, but then also thinking about what other supports and wonderful talent and resources that we know exist across the state become much more directly available at that local level. And so that's something that we've just started to do, and I think is in partnership with our county offices, we're seeing what else we may need to make sure that we're ready to be responsive to is something that we're excited about in this differentiated assistance work.
Perfect, what a great segue. So Ed, you want to talk about county offices?
Sure.
Thank you.
So good, beautiful Friday morning. Definitely. It's good to be with all of you, and thank you again to ACSA. So again, my name is Ed MANANSALA. I'm the County Superintendent of Schools in El Dorado County. I'm asked not just to represent our county, but the 58 county superintendents. And with that said, I have two colleagues of mine, Jim Brescia from San Luis Obispo and Scott from Calaveras County. So welcome to the both of you. Feel free to weigh in if you wish as well. So as you know, there are over 1,000 school districts in California. Those 1,000 school districts fall under the umbrella of 58 county superintendents. And when it comes to the one statewide system of support, the county offices play a significant role. As we all know, in the complexity and diversity of California, there is no one county office that possesses the capacity and expertise to address every need in their county. And with that said, that's why we have an existing structure. Again, we acknowledge the California County Superintendent's Educational Services Association, often as CSESA. And CSESA is an entity that provides an opportunity for county offices to look at issues of capacity, organization. It becomes an intermediary often with statewide initiatives to ensure that we have just the right level of supports going into all of our districts. So within CSESA, an area of focus in particular in these last 5 years has just been the emerging rollout of all of the reforms. So prior to coming into the county office, this is my 6th year, I was at Sacramento City Unified School District. And when I stepped into the county office, again, approximately 6 years ago, I could see the emerging role of county offices with LCFF. So if you think about 5+ years ago, LCFF was rolling out, and you had the local control accountability plans, you had the dashboard rolling out, and now our differentiated assistance in the context of the statewide system of support. The county offices have played a critical role in the implementation of that work. And how do we do that well as one system is the emerging issue for us right now.
Great. Heather, can you talk a bit about the SELPA's role?
Okay, great. My name is Heather DiFede. I'm the SELPA Director for East County SELPA, and as Ed, I'm also wearing 2 hats of representation, not only for my local SELPA, but also on behalf of the California SELPA Administrators Association. So as an association, similar to CSESA, we are a network that support SELPA directors across the state of California and providing that infrastructure and knowledge base to help their local efforts. For example, we have done some training in the area of improvement science for our members to help increase their capacity to support you as member districts. We also have been involved at the state level in working collaboratively with CCEE and CSESA as part of the various groups that have been organizing the efforts around the statewide system of support. And we're also engaged in something a little bit different than the rest of you with the annual assurances support plan that was passed in the trailer bill language this summer. Where that's really trying to align the work that is being done at SELPAs with the LCAP goals of districts, as well as the supports that SELPAs are providing along not only the differentiated assistance, but the other quality assurance measures and the monitoring activities that are engaged in CDE. So we are also working with the annual assurances plan template and working collaboratively with CDE on that effort. Locally, as SELPAs, we are also engaged as partners with our county offices. As Ed alluded to, the capacity and the expertise of county office varies across the state. And as SELPA directors, we see ourselves as a resource for this area of special education. Unfortunately, the most recent dashboard had 163 of the LEAs identified due to the lack of academic progress for students with disabilities, and so we really do see ourselves as a partner with our county offices of education and supporting our local districts.
Great, thank you. So we predicted that what happened out in the field was that districts were notified that they required differentiated assistance, and we think maybe a lot of people said, well, what does that mean? What are we going to get? How is it going to work? And so really our next 2 questions are what you all see as the components of differentiated assistance process. And you already alluded, Heather, thank you, to the whole idea of implementation and improvement science. But other resources, what can districts expect that you might bring as resources to districts? And then how do they connect when they need help, either to their counties or to any one of your agencies? So if I'm in your SELPA, how do I do this? And again, this question is open to all of you.
Well, I'll start.
Okay.
There are various ways with the CDE's efforts to align the performance indicator review process with the differentiated assistance process that really provides an opening for member LEAs to engage with their SELPAs. As you may know, that the performance indicator reviews are a monitoring activity that districts are involved in based on their outcomes on the annual performance report. And CDE has done a Herculean effort this year of aligning that timeline release as well as the targets to the same as the dashboard. So it's really starting to align our monitoring activities across special education and general education. So a SELPA would be engaged in that root cause analysis process and helping you develop your implementation plan to address those needs. And we really see the SELPAs as being partners with that work with the districts. And also, for example, in San Diego County, we're very fortunate that we as SELPAs are involved with the County Office of Education. We are members of their PLNs, their professional learning networks. We participated last year as our districts were diving into their data and doing the root cause analysis, especially as there was so much alignment with the performance indicator review process we had just engaged in with our districts. For this second year of implementation, we're also invited to all of the root cause analysis institutes our county office is offering, the data institutes, as well as the study sessions that they're holding with the districts that are identified in either year 1 or year 2. So there are a variety of ways to engage with the SELPAs, whether it's connecting through the county office's work or directly with your SELPA.
Great. Ed, could I ask you to go next because of the relationship there with county offices? Because you do more than just special ed.
We do. And I think going back, and this is a nice flow, the way that we're going from state right back down, the state level to Heather and going right back up. Because as Heather's referencing the alignment between the SELPAs and the county offices, that's exactly what we are experiencing in El Dorado County. So stepping back really quick, we have 15 school districts in El Dorado County, and approximately a year ago, when the results came out with differentiated assistance through the dashboard, 3 of our districts were identified for differentiated assistance, and the reason was for performance around students with disabilities. So we were part of that 163 that Heather was highlighting. So as you may be familiar, county offices will be, in a sense, the first responder going in and coming alongside the districts to walk through a data analysis and root cause analysis. And I think what was significant for us as a county office was the close partnership that we have with our geographic SELPA in El Dorado County. And so when you think about the team that's coming alongside the local school district that was identified for differentiated assistance, we had individuals who were leaders in our SELPA who were a part of our differentiated assistance team. And that was a significant shift, especially working with our districts. So again, that's just, it's symbolic of the changes that are taking place at the county office level and the partnerships that are taking place with the SELPAs. And as we look throughout the state, I think we're trying to identify these best practice models as we're learning and implementing at the same time.
Given that El Dorado County has one of the biggest charter SELPAs, could you do just a quick, how is that different for SELPAs when it isn't a local school district that you would be working with necessarily?
So in terms of charters entering into that space, in terms of being identified for differentiated assistance, we're in a place right now in exploring what will that model look like. So early stages, I would say there's a lot of learning that's taking place through the current work. Like we're just anticipating this next, trying to anticipate how many more districts will be identified, you know, with the results that we're anticipating here in the next few weeks. And that's not even including the charters at this point in time.
Right.
So
that's a great reason to move on back to Karla then, because from your perspective, you need to look at the whole state with these data elements, right?
Right. So specific to students with disabilities, we also wanted to make sure we understood across the state, where have we actually been doing better and where are the places, because there's been a lot of good work that's also been done to improve outcomes for students with disabilities. But we also wanted to know, where do we also see a real need to intervene and what should we start to think about? So one of the things that we've started to do is with, in partnership with Dr. Tom Hare from Harvard, School of Education, who has extensive experience in special education, especially looking at it from a state perspective, and in collaboration with the CDE, we've started to examine what some of those things are. And so what we've seen some improvements in, for example, is identification. We've seen that for the state of California, we're at or not below the identification rate compared to the national average. So right now it's at about 13 nationally. California's at about 12 to 13. It goes back and forth, right? Fluctuates. But we've been able to see that it's something where we're at a good place where compared to the nation. Another good place that we've started to see some improvements has been in the area of our English learners and looking at do we see a huge over-identification issue that we had seen many years prior. And what we're seeing is even with our large number of ELs in the state of California, we're not necessarily seeing a huge issue of disproportionality among our ELs in the state of California. Now, I say this with a caveat though. That said, that means that what we have been doing is working. Our work around MTSS, we need to continue to do that. Our work around making sure that our ELs are getting their English language development instruction, both designated as well as integrated. The California Roadmap, EL Roadmap, is an excellent example of how do we continue to do that good work. Because we all know that our disproportionality data, when you look at it at the local level, looks very different. And so in some places we're seeing improvements, in other places we're seeing that it's still an ongoing challenge. We also see amongst particular student populations, our Black and Latino youth, for example, are we seeing an issue of disproportionality? And we are. So there are places where we know this work still needs to improve. I think the one place that I would say that is of most importance that for Kristen Wright and myself in our conversations from the CD have been having is around the least restrictive environment. We're seeing that our students, especially our Black and Latino youth, are more likely to be in more restrictive environments than their other peers. And so why are these kinds of things happening? Because when I talk to folks, they know what they want to be able to do. There's some challenges though in making it happen. And so our next phase of our work is really starting to see what could be some basic level 1 supports that need to be available to all districts, be available to county offices that really communicate coherence on when we're looking at our special education systems, how do we ensure we're not always being too subjective and being more objective? I'll say this from an example. When I work with local districts, sometimes what I'll find is they're consulting or contracting or working with certain people, and everybody has their best practices they're bringing to the table. But if now the county office is working with them or the SELPA is working with them, they're hearing different messages. And that makes it really hard when you're already trying to do hard work. And so what do we as a state want to make sure we're putting in the hands of not just our districts, but our county office and SELPAs that would communicate what a good, healthy special education system is, so then we know we're building from a strong foundation. So that's another way in which CC is involved in, and I hope what you're seeing though is in collaboration with other state agencies. That's really what our core role is to work collaboratively and be responsive. I would say at the local level, because that's another hat that we wear, I think one of the things when we look at differentiated assistance is starting to also understand how agile do we need to be for each individual location, because it does look different everywhere. So what are those things that really should be consistent across different support models, and what are those things that we really need to make sure that we're being responsive enough to be able to meet those needs? And that, I think, is the next real big phase. As you look at the dashboard data coming out, I think 163, and it may increase or may decrease. The dashboard, some folks may be identified one year and then the next year they may not be. And so it's making sure that we're being as responsive as possible, but not forgetting that we need to make sure that everybody's got that good level 1 foundation, because if not, then folks will find themselves right back on the dashboard again feeling we're doing the good work, but we're not just able to move forward the way we'd like.
Jason, can you address then from the State Department and State Board perspective how all that will come together?
Do we have another hour for that answer? I've got a dissertation in my bag. I can pull that out. No, one of the things I'm reflecting on the comments from Heather and Karla and Ed, and I think it's important to kind of take a slight step back to talk a little bit about the why, to remind people about the why. If you've never heard of Simon Sinek's work, I'd encourage you to look it up, but he encourages this idea of you got to remind people about the why. Like, why is it that these individuals are up here talking in the way that they are, describing the engineering and the design of this system in this way? And I think first and foremost, this goes back to the kind of core tenets of LCFF. Equity, local control, and ensuring higher levels of student achievement through those reforms. And the local control component in particular is important because that is not something that we have had in our history here in California. It is and was a dramatic shift in the ed policy landscape here in California. But what comes along with that is, how do you create a system that can hold in tension the flexibility that you are offering to local school districts and schools, but also ensure that the system is achieving equitable outcomes for kids? Student progress overall is moving across the state of California. And the state has that role and responsibility. It's given to them in federal statute. It's also kind of embodied in a lot of state laws as well here in the state of California. And so thinking as we're kind of listening to these structures that each of these agencies are putting together and the networks that they're developing, that's a really key question to continue to kind of think about and process through. And we're not done. I think that's kind of worth stating here, that the system of support in the state of California is still in design and development. It is still evolving, and what it will look like in a year's time, what it will look like in 2 years' time is going to be completely different from what it is today, which I also think is another kind of point about the why. And it's a core belief that the system now has here in California, which is it is constantly evolving and improving. And not just from the perspective of saying oh yeah, I got a little bit better, but doing it with a set of intentions and a set of rigor and quality that we've never seen before in the state of California. And so when I reflect on the kind of engineering that kind of goes by, and we've heard a lot about that from the other panelists, the Department of Education's also been working on some of that engineering, the things that what I would suggest that school districts can't really do much about. And here's one very specific example. So when we credential teachers here in the state of California for either single subject or multiple subjects in general ed classrooms as compared to those in special education, there was almost a firewall that existed. That is, that special ed credentials didn't really care much about general education content. On the other side with general ed, they didn't really care as much for supports around behaviors that were coming up in the classroom, particularly with students that had IEPs. And so the Department of Education has been working collaboratively with the CTC and with the state board to basically change that, to change the foundations upon which teachers that are coming into the profession here in California need to have those kind of cross skill sets as they're walking into the classroom. And while that may not appear or seem like something that is significant or important to the district, and it shouldn't be, I would argue, it's going to help down the road. In 3 or 4 years, you are going to start seeing teachers show up in districts that have skill sets that their predecessors did not have initially, which potentially means districts are having to put less dollars into professional development to have those skills present in the classroom for those kids, right? You can kind of see the ripple effect as a result. So we're hearing a lot about the kind of engineering of this. I think on the other side, the kind of experience that we intend districts to have around differentiated assistance, some of my panel members kind of raised before, but I would kind of push on a couple of items in particular. I think first and foremost, as Ed was talking about, that the tone and relationship between the school district and those that represent the school district in the county office is significantly different and better, right? So this looks very different across all kinds of different counties and districts and circumstances, but you should be having this experience as working with the county that they're not coming to you and saying here's the solution you need to solve, here's the checklist, here's the things you need to do, go do it. But instead, what they're showing up to say is, hey, we are here to learn with you and we want to grow with you. So let's sit down and have a real conversation about understanding what is really potentially going on with the district, right? Not just the surface thing that you're seeing, and that was the kind of root cause analysis that Ed was kind of mentioning before. I think the second thing that I would suggest is that there is this notion of mutual accountability that we are trying to infuse, that the state agencies and counties are trying to infuse into the system. That is, that again, in this relationship between counties and school districts, or frankly, any agency besides the school district and that entity that is supporting them, that there's a set of agreements, right? If the district commits to wanting to identify that problem or challenge that they want to advance, that the support provider, if it's the county, a state agency, a third party, it doesn't matter who it is, that they've got their own set of commitments that they're going to make, that they are just as invested in helping that district to achieve better outcomes for kids as the district is. Because otherwise, the relationship potentially goes down the route of saying, well, I did my part, district. You are on your own to kind of find your path, right? So really thinking about how we define and think about mutual accountability, which again, very much in formation. You know, we've got some examples of this across the state, but using the power of networks and collaboration and conversation to define that for the work in California is going to be important. And then the last thing that I'll say, and it seems simple, but it's, I mean, as a former district administrator, I cannot tell you how frustrating it was when I had a state agency show up one week and they said, hey, I'm here to look at X. And then 3 weeks later, another state agency shows up and they're wanting to look at a very similar thing. And my response was, why aren't you talking to one another? Why aren't you having a conversation about what is happening in our organization? If you really want to support us, number one, don't waste the time. And number two, if you're going to show up, we want to be able to create that value. So that very basic, and you've heard some of those examples already that Heather and Karla have offered, where even Kristen Wright's division within the department is coordinating with the work that counties are doing and how they're showing up with school districts to make sure that those kinds of assessments and those kinds of work with the districts are happening. Now, it's not perfect, but again, as I said before, I think the design and the development of it is really important. And I think what you'll see this year in particular is, again, another wave of work that counties are trying to really transform that relationship with districts, and now moving from a space of looking at problem identification and understanding what the root cause is to a space where we're going to start trying things. We're going to start putting in new processes or new systems to see how the system responds as a result of that. And I think, you know, similar to where we were last year, we're going to be in a place of having to deeply reflect on what worked, what didn't work, and how do we get better at it and really intentional about responding to what we're learning at the end of the school year.
So Jason, if I can just add on to what you were saying, it's not even just the coordination for efficiency's sake of different parts of CDE coming in and evaluating things. It's also when you're looking at some of the special education issues, and we've done this through some of our work with disproportionality and the performance indicator review, the crux of the problem is in general education. And special ed is the canary in the coal mine. And so those issues are showing up in special ed, and so there's monitoring, and everybody's looking at special ed and not stepping back and coordinating and saying, hey, wait a minute, that issue is also happening in gen ed. It's not statistically showing up in the dashboard yet. And so I think that's another plus of that coordination that we're seeing, is not just the efficiency.
Great, which allows us to reinforce the concept of the one system. If you have the questions in front of you, I will reference question number 4, which asks you, and Arturo, did you give them something to write down, their questions? If you have a question, what we want at the end of our session today is to have you write that question down. What can we at ACSA do to facilitate your work in districts and classrooms across the state? Our goal at ACSA is to ensure that this isn't the only conversation that happens about this, and so we want to hear from you. What do you need so that ACSA as a member district organization can say, what can we do for you and how can we help coordinate across all of this, recognizing how much incredible work is already being collaborated, but if ACSA can support you, they'd like to know that. So please feel free to write your questions down and we'll get back to them. We have 2 more questions for you all, and that is that we're looking at the dashboard coming out again in a new form. And so it's going to look different, it might have more information. So can you tell us what we can expect from this new information, or how will it be different? How will it impact this conversation?
Do you want to start?
I'm looking Jason's of latest state updates.
Okay. This is one of those responses where got to be careful what you say, right? Cut out of the bag. No, in all seriousness. So I think that this, like the work on the dashboard, specifically around evolution of some of the state indicators, if any of the folks in the room follow the state board agendas and some of the items that have been discussed over the previous 6 months, there are several state indicators that will be significantly changing. There are some that are coming on, for example, chronic absenteeism, that will now be getting, schools and districts will be getting some type of color code from the 5x5. And I think this is really reflective of the state's intention to want to be thoughtful about how we are putting state indicators, even local indicators, in front of schools and school districts as a means to ensure that they are indicators of progress and that they can be used in that intention to help schools and districts kind of grow better. As Maureen had mentioned, there is a redesign. The state engaged with a consultant to help kind of refresh the look and feel of it. It's gotten some really positive feedback, even from some of the kind of initial feedback that we've been getting from the field on this. And so that will be coming along with the dashboard as well. As you might expect, as a result of the dashboard, a new set of school districts will be identified for support for differentiated assistance in level 2. A couple things that I will put out, for this audience to think about and consider is, I was talking before about the engineering. I often use this analogy of, at some point in the future, we can get to a place that's similar to what Amazon's experience is with customers, right? That a district can ask a question of a county or of another third-party provider, and within a timely amount of days or even hours, perhaps, they get a response back that is relevant, that is spot on, and offer for additional support. And that they don't have to be concerned with all the engineering that goes on behind the scenes. Like when I get on the Amazon app, I'll purchase something and I'll say, click here, and then a brown box shows up at my door a day or two later, right? It's pretty simple. But the logistics, if you've ever investigated this, that goes into making that actually happen behind the scenes is beyond extraordinary. And the work that California is doing to try and engineer a system that can be that responsive and that timely and that appropriate for a school district or an individual is what we're aiming for. And so the changes with the dashboard help to do that. Many of the different things that have been introduced in the recent trailer bill, specifically around the various lead positions. So these are county offices that are designated to lead on either specific topics or within specific regions or areas within the state of California, have a tremendous amount of work to do to figure out how they're going to talk to one another to make sure that they can be responsive when that district calls, and they will. So whatever set of districts end up being identified, some of which will be on the list, for the second time. Some of them will be on there for the first time, and some of them will not be there anymore. But in any circumstance, it is the work of the state and the county offices and these new designated leads and SELPAs to be working together to figure out how those networks can really be responsive when those districts start asking questions or kind of raise their hand for support. And so that work is actively happening, certainly before and after this panel, leading up to the release. And we're going to try some things out, see how they go, and look for improvements in the future as well.
Do they have a release date?
Yeah, my understanding is that we're looking at probably the first week in December is on or about that date. There may be some delays. My understanding is that all the state board items were approved yesterday, which was the necessary trigger to make sure staff had the time to actually pull all the files together, get it ready for the dashboard, run some of the other necessary analyses. So as my understanding as of yesterday, they're on track for that. And so early December, so very similar to last year. And I think the state wants to kind of keep that cadence going forward and then try and figure out ways to go even faster to make sure those data get out to the field to ensure that it's in line with the sets of activities that districts are going through if it's budget development or rewriting parts of the LCAP to adjust to the dashboard and things like that.
Thank you. One other thing that I think Kristen would mention is the fact that it isn't just the dashboard results, but all kinds of results that are coming out that she'd really like to see if the timing could be the same so that districts get notified about all kinds of data at one point for one plan development, at least as a goal.
And I think that's a perfect segue to what I was going to add, Maureen. As I shared that in the past, our performance indicator review process was not directly aligned to the dashboard data. It was a lag year, so it felt a little awkward and clunky for districts, and CD is committed to aligning that review process along with the dashboard data. We've always argued that we're getting data that's 2 and 3 years old that we're doing monitoring activities for, and CD has heard that, and they have done like I said, a Herculean effort to get our data from our June case miss, which was submitted in August, ready and is anticipating timing it with the dashboard release. So I think that's a very positive step. So that dashboard release of the special education indicators being tied to it is a big change this year. And last year we still had the lag year, and we had some districts that were in differentiated assistance and some that were in PIR but weren't in differentiated assistance. So I think this year it'll be more in line. So that's one change for this dashboard release. And the other major change that I see from the special ed perspective is one that you and Ed alluded to earlier, which was the impact of charters. So in the past, we have had charters who are their own LEA for special ed purposes were involved in that annual performance report review, and they had their own special ed report card or APR on the federal indicators. Now all charters, regardless of their special education status, will be on the dashboard. That means because those monitoring activities are tied to the dashboard, all of your charters will be getting their own performance indicator review if they don't meet those targets. So that is a monumental shift, and the number of agencies that are going to be monitored for that may increase dramatically. So it may not just impact the charter SELPA, but all of those districts that have schools of the district's charter, which our typical school isn't getting DA. It's based on our district data. For your charters, it's going to be different. So that's something I really want to highlight for you.
Even as we're talking right now about this approach to the new dashboard and the results that are going to come out more than likely the first week of December, and the approach is intended to be from a continuous improvement partnership approach with the county. I recall having this same type of presentation a little over a year ago, and I even had district superintendents who were even in our own county as a part of this process in terms of understanding the rollout of it and the approach. But when the 3 districts that were identified for differentiated assistance were identified, and I followed up with individual calls, it's always interesting to see how it reveals still the significant shift that we are in. And what I mean by that is one superintendent responded with, was ready for this. We've been analyzing our data, looking forward to you coming alongside so that we can look at this information together. Like, that was one end of the continuum. The other end of the continuum was a district superintendent who said, very familiar with this process, Ed, I've been through PI before, right? And referencing program improvement. And it didn't matter how much we had been talking about the shift and the emphasis on continuous improvement. It's easy just to go back to harsh accountability, punitive accountability, and that is what we are moving away from. And again, that's the culture shift that I'm describing. So going back to Jason's example or highlight of the why, we're really believing that the shift from punitive accountability to continuous improvement is something that is going to benefit all students in California.
The way the indicators are coming out this year is on a rolling basis, just based on the state board items. So similar to last year, it's basically on like a Friday release, Tuesday webinar type of a stance where data will be released to districts for a private preview if there's any issues that you're seeing in the data before it's uploaded to the dashboard. the subsequent week, there is a webinar, as Karla had referenced, that kind of helps to kind of unpack the item itself. And so all of this is in means of wanting to make sure that there is some real quality information that's being presented to the public, and creating that chance for LEAs to review that before. So.
Great, thank you. Our last question here is that we are coming to the end of 2018 in just 2 more months. So as we plan for the next steps for the state system of support, what would success look like for the system of support at the end of 2019? And let's talk about the elephant in the room, being that we don't even know necessarily who our next superintendent of public instruction is, although it's close. I'm still seeing that we don't even know that, but we are going to have a new superintendent. We know we're going to have a new governor. We'll have new board members. So this question doesn't need to be incredibly political, but I think it is. So your perspective on what would this system of support look like in an ideal way within a year? What do you think?
I'm happy to start. I think the state system of support is something that we're very excited about for many of the reasons that people have identified here. But I think by next year, what I'd really love to be able to say that we've moved from engineering to one in where we're implementing, and we have some real great places where we've seen that work collectively between the county offices, SELPAs, and all the different state agencies, being able to really be a support to a district, and that districts feel that way in return. I think to be able to say that we've been able to test this work out in different places and see that positive reaction and feeling of support would be something I think we would all really want to see. I think the other piece would be that there are resources and learnings that we've all been engaged in, or great work that we know is happening already, and that we've been able to capture that some way so other people can be able to see that common playbook. Some of this is not necessarily something that's impossible. It's very possible. We know it's happening in certain places, but helping people to see the way in which, what are those foundational pieces, and then what else do you need, and being able to make that available to everyone. I'd love to be able to say that we have things that we can point people to. That way everyone gets some of that experience of success across the dashboard indicators.
I would agree. I'd build off on the idea of being able to see areas in the state that a local district superintendent would be able to say, I'm sensing progress in my district in the areas that we have been identified, and if it's in the context of differentiated assistance, that their partnership is going well with the county office. They see the types of resources, responsive resources, coming from both the county office in addition to other support providers. But I think that there would be that sense of momentum there. I think the culture shift that I was just describing, in terms of the emphasis on continuous improvement, that would be embraced and acknowledged. And again, we would have model examples throughout the state. Going back to the engineering topic, I think it's important that there is a level of patience and yet commitment across the agencies and organizations, which includes obviously the districts, but that sense of urgency would never be lost. And I'm referring to these issues of equity that we have been describing this morning, and even threaded throughout the why behind LCFF.
Well, in my utopia, there would be no need for differentiated assistance, but that was my real wish. But knowing that we still have areas to improve, I am appreciative that even the process of differentiated assistance is really going through that same plan, study, do, or plan, do, study, and act process of the implementation and review of its process. So continuing to refine that engineering, as Ed alluded to. And I think the thing for me that's been a little exciting in this work is that it's not program improvement. It's not a punitive thing. this job that we are doing to educate our students, whether they're in general ed or special ed or any combination, is tough work, and we don't need to be hammered down. We really do need thought partners and to be engaged across our agencies and across our LEAs and our county offices. So I'm excited about that, and excited about the opportunity to continue to refine this process, and hopefully, as we've had districts that have gone through the supports that have been provided through SELPAs and through the county offices and through CCEE and CDE, that we have some that are performing well and exiting this differentiated assistance highway, that we have those that can point to this process actually working and performing, and not like the program improvement where I'm on that hockey stick and I'm here for the next 7 years. I'm just buckling down till the rules change. And so I think I'm excited and hopeful that we can continue this process, and we'll have some in the next year or two that have said this process worked for us, and that those are those bright spots.
So just to totally concur. Yes, all that. The only other thing that I'll add to that, to the points about my fellow panel members, is to say that one of the things that we want to do is try and collect some data on this, right? So I'll pinpoint one of the things Ed said about culture, and I'll get even more specific about it's just a totally different mindset and a set of behaviors that professionals and school districts are going to need to adopt based on the principles that California is really pushing through this set of reforms. We've referred to them in conversations with state agencies and with counties as how do we, quote, build the capacity of professionals in our system? And I think we have started to put some language around that. We want to start collecting some data around that at both the school district, but also at the county and state agency level. So even for the people that are sitting up here, how do we think about our own capacity and what are the necessary skills we each need in order to be effective actors within the system? The other 2 points, I guess maybe a little bit of a crystal ball that I'll put out into the universe. I think first and foremost, it's important to remind folks that a year ago, the tone and conversation about this reform, LCFF, there was a lot of nervousness about what would happen at this transition point, going into a space where we're getting a new governor, a new state superintendent of public instruction, a new set of state board members. And I want to remind the room that that is not the tone that we've heard, either out on the campaign trail for our Governor Newsom elect, or for whether it's Tucker Thurman, both of which are like fully endorsing the work of LCFF. I think you're going to see a shift in the governor's office in terms of focus, and he's been very clear about wanting to look more to early childhood and to higher education and thinking about some of those investments in data systems. But I would just remind the room, and as practitioners, you guys have experienced this on a day-to-day basis, there is still a lot of work to do in K-12. I think first and foremost, figuring out some of the other policy issues around ESSA and how we bring in other school accountability, including work around charters, is going to be pretty essential in the kind of early goings. I think another kind of big elephant in the room is around funding. What we see at West Ed is a pretty big divide between the way the general public, right, like any father or mother walking down the street with their kid, how they think about K-12 education in this state, and how practitioners are experiencing that. The message all along has been that we've been pumping billions and billions of dollars back into public education, which is true, since the Great Recession. The footnote to that, which most people don't understand, is that it's getting it back to inflation-adjusted 2007-8 levels, which doesn't account for all the other things that we're being asked to do now in the public education system here in California, and that is an issue that will need to be confronted in one way or another as school districts are experiencing a lot of different expenditure pressures and going through sets of cuts that the general public is asking, why are you going through cuts? I thought you were getting these billions upon billions of dollars. So I think that's another issue that state policymakers and practitioners are going to have to wrestle with in the near future. And I think relative, specific to special education, California hasn't really touched the work around special ed in quite some time. I think it is probably due for a relook at kind of top to bottom how we're thinking about the policies, processes, and procedures, the way practitioners are experiencing this work, and ultimately how this really squares with the work of LCFF and those reforms, and I'll go back to holding this tension between the local control that districts and schools are being provided and how the state's able to kind of monitor that ongoing progress over time.
And Jason, thank you for highlighting some of the issues that we do face with the funding and the policy for special education. I know we did have the Special Education Task Force. Maureen, you were a co-chair of that work, which provided a lot of feedback and input from the public, from parents, families, community members, and school districts. And so some of the things that we've talked about today were a part of that work. The credentialing issue, having the common trunk among credentialing, that work came from the task force, and some of this early education items, and this one system of support idea really was echoed strongly in that work that was done a few years ago. So I'm hoping that we're going to be getting to a point where we can implement some of the other recommendations from the task force report. And I know Jason touched on this, the general ed funding that we're still looking to restore back to the 07-08 funding, but also in special education, where we have this same yardstick that we're all measured on, and we have very disparate funding rates across SELPAs. And I think that's an important piece of this is, we're all being measured the same, but yet we're funded so dramatically different. I mean, just in San Diego County, our SELPA in particular, there's another SELPA in our same county that if we were the same exact size, they get $5 million more than we do. We're not even at the statewide target, so we're $1 million under that, in addition to the deficit that's been applied to special education funds that has not been applied to general ed. So we even know we're that short. It's even exacerbated more deeply because of the deficit factor that's put into special ed funding.
Not to mention that we don't get any preschool special ed funding, but we could go on about that for a long time.
I'm going to just calm myself with the beautiful view.
First of all, please join me in thanking these incredibly articulate people